Hey everyone, this is Jack Bourne, founder of Deadline Funnel. With me today is my special guest, Michelle Knight. Let me tell you about Michelle. She's a branding coach and strategist who helps entrepreneurs who struggle with building revenue to master brand storytelling and advanced marketing strategies so they can escape the pressure of social media and finally get their brand seen and paid consistently. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is her story, and we're going to get into the top ways entrepreneurs can improve their brand storytelling. Great to have you here, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited and really honored as well.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to jump into this topic. Before we hit record, I was telling you how much I loved seeing the story that you put on your website, and I love everything about storytelling and storytelling infused into our marketing and our messaging. So it sounds like this is going to be a fun conversation. So why don't we start with your story? So I've read your website. It's a fascinating story, but please share it with the audience, because I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to parts of your journey.
Yeah, I should warn everyone, right? I'm talking about brand storytelling, so there's not really a tiny version of this, right? We're going to get into the details a bit, but I essentially started my business after my son was born in December of 2015. I had a really intense labor, a really difficult postpartum experience. I had full intentions of going back to my job. I loved it. I worked in PR, I worked in communication. And after my son was born, I looked at my husband and I said, I don't want to go back. I want to start my own business, which was completely out of the blue. I didn't know what I wanted to start a business about, anything. I didn't even know really how to create a brand. And so I dove in, like many of us do, into the world of online businesses and just consumed as much as I could. And I really, really struggled. I knew how to handle social media communication, all of that, but for some reason I couldn't grow my community. I was doing all of the things. I had built a website, I had built the brand, and around the 8-month mark, I told my husband, something's missing. Something feels disconnected. I don't brand. I don't feel like you're really talking about the things that light me up. I feel like I've created kind of a persona or a brand around what I'm seeing online. And so I stripped it all back. I deleted everything on my website. I threw up travel photos. I started telling my story on live video. Literally nothing changed with my strategy except being more intimate with my storytelling. And I immediately started signing clients in my audience. And that's when I knew that my little micro audience of 10 people, which slowly grew, and I watched as these conversions happen, that it all came down to the connection that I was making. So I started to teach entrepreneurs how to harness brand storytelling, and specifically their story, in creating their marketing strategy. And that has really morphed into teaching entrepreneurs how to create an aligned business, a business that matches their story in all aspects, not just in their marketing and how their brand is presented, but also how they design their business and how they want to live their lives. And a lot of that comes from kind of my own journey with up and moving my family and moving into an RV, traveling the United States. My husband and I have made some really fun, awesome moves based on the success of my business. But more importantly, we've lost a lot of people. It's part of my story. I've lost my brother to cancer. We've lost multiple family members to cancer. And that really motivates me to just show up as my true self and help other entrepreneurs do the same thing, so that they're not just creating a business that provides money, but they're creating a business that makes an impact in their lives and in the lives of others.
There's so much there. I was listening. So this morning over coffee. So I'm in Australia right now, and so it's early in the morning for me. I know it's late afternoon for you. So I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and the host was sharing a story of an entrepreneur who worked until he was 55, sold his business for several $100 million, and he was like, "Okay, family, I'm ready to travel the world." And at that point, they're like, who are you, and why would we want to travel with you? Because you've been gone, you've been dedicated, like you've been head down. Congrats on selling that business and achieving your goals, but like you haven't been there. And I personally never wanted to have that life, to win the trophy, to get the brass ring, or whatever analogy you want to use. But then at the end of the day, feel like what was, if I did this journey like all alone, what was this worth? And so a story, part of your story that really resonated with me was it sounds like you're traveling the US or have traveled the US with your family, and you're enjoying the time freedom and the ability to make choices that that you wouldn't have been able to make had you not jumped into this, taken the leap. So right off the bat, your brand story is really resonating with me. So tell me, let's pivot a little bit and turn the microscope back at the either the story that you told or maybe stories that you've heard me tell. And you're an expert for your clients on how they can better tell their stories. What do you find is the gap between the stories that entrepreneurs tell instinctively, or they start with, where clients start in your program versus the transformation that you're trying to get them to make? What is that gap? How would you describe that?
Yeah. So instinctually, we all start with our founder story or our brand story. You just heard me share a version of that, right? There's so many different versions that we might share. That's actually the story I heard you tell on a podcast that made me invest in Deadline Funnel. We could talk about that later, right? Like, these are the ones that tend to be the easiest for us, but this is where a lot of entrepreneurs stop. And so then they're missing out on this golden opportunity for deeper connection, because the brand story, I like to say, is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's just what kind of introduces you to someone. It might grab the attention of the brand. You might build that, immediate connection, but there's so much more there. And what a lot of entrepreneurs miss out on are the everyday micro stories that you incorporate in your content, in your email marketing, even TikTok videos, right? Short form videos. Like, if we really step back and look at all marketing as a form of storytelling, that's literally what it is. And so a lot of entrepreneurs will stop because they feel like they've done their brand story. Okay, I'm good. I'll just sell this one story until the end of time, and miss out on those small little micro connectors. And I think that this is really important because you resonated with my story because of the travel aspect and the wanting to actually live your life. Someone else might resonate with a part of my story on giving birth to their child and having this deep desire to start a business. Someone else might hear a part of my story and resonate with the fact that I had lost a loved one and was living my life a specific way. And so when we only tell one side of our story, we miss out on all of these various connection points.
Yeah, that's so how would you help someone, first of all, come up with these various different stories and mine their past history for these stories? And then where's the best place for entrepreneurs to share these stories?
Yeah. So the very first thing the biggest obstacle I think I encounter when it comes to brand storytelling is believing that it's actually effective. Like, I think we go to create our brand and we're like, all right, let me write my about me page. And then we check that off a list. But the idea behind brand storytelling, what we really need to remember is that it really leads to the purchase decision. Studies show that 86% of people want authentic brands and want to purchase from authentic brands. We know that 77% of people buy from brands that they share the same values with. We know that this could be the decision that gets someone to say, yes, this is the brand for me, or no, this isn't the brand for me. And so once you fully commit to that, then it's a lot easier to look at story opportunities in your content. And so what I recommend my clients do is, number one, start with the brand story. And for service providers, course creators, personal brands, it's actually a lot easier than we think. And the strategy that I teach is called the 3 transitions. So you identify 3 moments in your life where something changed, shifted, you took a turn, you made a decision, it either happened to you or you were in the driver's seat. And you really reflect on what happened and what did that moment teach you. And you identify these 3 pieces and you link them together. And you end with where you are today, right? It's the end of a story, or as I like to say, kind of the beginning of a business. And it's introducing your business. It's essentially what led you to this moment. And my clients, when they actually just go through this process, you could write an about me page in like 20 minutes. And so when you're really just kind of like looking at your life and really reflecting on what are the things that have happened to me, what are the decisions that I've made that have led me to having this business and the impact that I want to have, in the world, whatever that looks like, bam, right? We have our brand story. And then what that also provides you is these main touch points for your business. So I shared 3 of mine with you where I've lost loved ones. I had my son and traveling the world with my family, making that decision. And so those are kind of launching off points for a lot of micro stories that I might create. And that's a really great way to kind of get the juices flowing. So that's kind of where we can start with the brand story and how that can get us going. And then, yeah, go ahead. I was like,
well, I'm sorry. I'm just so excited to jump in.
Yeah.
So the 3 pieces, I just want to make sure that I understand are these the 3 phases of a story, or are you saying 3 stories, or are you saying both of those?
Yeah. So there are essentially 3 phases of the bigger founder story, but each of them can be created into their own micro story. So I'll give you an example. If you go to my About Me page, you'll see these 3 touch points. And now when you reread it, you're going to be like, oh, I see phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. But then I might send an email to my audience about starting a business and how difficult it is. And I'm going to elaborate more on the aspect of doing it with a baby on my back and crawling at my feet and having to juggle a 9 to 5 and that specific moment in time. And so when it comes to those micro stories, it's less about like, look at this journey, the hero's journey, as you know, it's used in marketing a lot. And let's focus in on this specific moment in time, these specific details where you can paint a really vivid picture. And that's the key, I believe, to using brand storytelling in your marketing efforts.
So let's talk about the ways in which we actually go about telling a story. Do you find that people, maybe particularly entrepreneurs, fall short in the way that they tell a story? Because a lot of entrepreneurs, I would imagine, have the mental baggage, true or not, that they're not like, I'm not a good storyteller. I don't know how to tell stories. And so that kind of probably manifests itself in a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they're held back. So, where we're in the actual, once we've identified what transition stories they want to tell, now it's their turn to tell it. Do they struggle with that? And what do you commonly see as the struggle that they have? And what's the key to get past that?
Yeah. So the biggest struggle is that I don't have a great story. And I hear this a lot because people hear my story or read my story and they're like, well, I've never had those crazy life moments happen to me. I've never had those experiences. And I remind them that it's not really those moments that are making the difference. It's the micro stories, the micro connection. And so this comes from really knowing your audience. This is the key. This is the part that a lot of people miss when it comes to storytelling. In order to be an effective storyteller when it comes to marketing, it's not really about you just telling any story that you want to tell. It's about knowing your audience to their core and being able to pull the stories from your experiences as well as your client experiences and position them and to aid them through the buying process. So, I'm lucky because my ideal customer tends to be someone who is running a business. So those would be pieces of the stories that I like to elaborate and pull on. But it really does come down to who is this story for? Because I always say once it leaves your mouth, it's not about you anymore, right? It's specifically for your audience. And so the first thing that I recommend people identify is who the heck are they speaking to, which is just a core foundation of branding in general. But then every time they're creating a piece of content and incorporating storytelling into it, identify, what is the value that this is going to provide my audience? What do I want them to do with this feeling? Because that's essentially, what you're doing through brand storytelling.
Gotcha. Right. So it's a way to deliver feeling, but I would imagine in a lot of cases a lesson too. But you're connecting. Like you've got to make that connection, right? People have to feel that emotional connection through your story. What about so are there some specific, maybe this is diving too deep, but are there some specific techniques that you like to incorporate into how people tell their story that's sort of a big aha or light bulb moment for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll dive as deep as we want into this topic. So I think the first part is kind of the framework. So with any great story, and I can't take credit for a lot of this information. If you anyone watching is not familiar with Donald Miller, he's a fantastic brand storytelling magician, as I like to refer to him. And so he talks a lot about kind of the brand story and the hero's journey. And so the main four pieces are character, conflict, conclusion, and a call to action, because we're all in business here, right? So there has to be a center focus of the story. It might be you, it might be a client, it could also be a product or a service. Maybe you're telling a story of that product and service. Maybe you're even having your audience imagine themselves in the story. We see this a lot. Imagine a life where you can do this. Imagine not having to do this, right? The character is your customer. So we've got the character. And then we've got the conflict, because it's not fun unless there's a little bit of tension in a story. This is where the concept of open looping, soap operas, things like that, really kind of keep us like tuning in for more. And so if you can create tension within the story, then you can keep your audience engaged. And then, of course, conclusion or the result. If you don't conclude, you're going to make a lot of people mad. So leave them with some sort of a conclusion. This happened, I felt this way, it's your turn, my client achieved X results. And then of course the CTA, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to go learn more about your products and services, send you a DM, comment below, just take this information and put it on a Post-it, right? Depending on your business, what is that? And when you can have those 4 C's, as I like to call them, then you know that you've really structured your story in a really effective way.
So I'm dying to know, what was the story that you heard me tell that made you think, I need to check out this deadline funnel thing?
Well, this is interesting, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because I was already familiar with deadline funnel, and this is the power of storytelling, everyone. All right, it's case study 101. I was already familiar with deadline funnel. I had been told to use it in my business. My first group was called Authentic Brand Builder. So authenticity is a huge component, and that was a huge marketing, approach for deadline funnel, authentic, timers. So I already knew about it, but I convinced myself that I didn't need it, and it was expensive. So I remember listening to your podcast. I remember exactly where I was, California, because I walked into Starbucks and they didn't have oat milk, and I was like, what's happening? Where am I? And I was listening to your podcast interview, and you were telling your story, why you created Deadline Funnel, really sharing more from your mouth about authenticity and why that was important, why you moved your family to Australia. And I immediately was like, well, fine, I'm done. And I signed up for Deadline Funnel that day. And so it was just hearing you, the founder, of why you created it. I really connected with your values. I connected with that you were a father and you made this decision for your family. And I was like, all right, this is the brand for me. And that is why brand storytelling is so important, because our consumers are weighing, do we invest in this? Do we buy this? Which brand do I go with? Every single day. And it can be these stories that change everything.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. It's something that I love telling stories through email, but I look at your about page. I'm like, man, there's a part of me that there's this push pull inside of me. I feel like I want to share some of that information. It obviously connected with you, and I tend to share that on the podcast, because one of the things that always comes up is like, what's your origin story? Let's tell a story. So a podcast a lot of times are like story time, like tell me a story. And so a lot of that stuff comes up on the podcast interviews that I do. But there's this push pull that I have of, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I don't want to share that like in social media on the websites, but there's another part of me that knows it's so effective, you should do this. So I don't know, I get in my own way.
Yeah, well, I think it's super common. I am definitely in the camp against most online marketers and website designers that tell you that your About Me page isn't about you. I call BS. I say your About Me page is 100% about you and your brand. Why am I going to that page? I'm not going to that page as a consumer to learn about me. I'm going to learn about you and why you have your business. But it's not just you talking at me, right? There are opportunities to invite the reader in. And I don't know if you probably didn't notice this on my About page, but I ask a lot of questions. I say things like, have you ever felt like that? Have you ever had this moment where you went through an experience that made you question everything? Have you ever felt like you were called for more? And by subtly asking those questions, I'm inviting my reader into the story, which I think is the key to a successful About Me page.
I see. And I'm definitely going to reread your About Me page now. I think everyone here is definitely going to give out your website in a little bit, because I know someone listening, several people listening are thinking like, where is this website? We'll get to that in just a second. But this is really terrific. And I think I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think bringing that reader into the story so that they're more involved, again, really drives that emotional connection home, and they start to connect with the story and the brand a lot better. So that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Why don't we bring this home by talking about who you typically serve, and how you help them. We already covered this a little bit, but I want to make sure that anyone who wants to take their brand storytelling to the next level, they know where to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with entrepreneurs who are really driven by impact. It's a deciding factor, right? Mission-driven entrepreneurs who wants to create a business, to create an impact for others, a ripple effect, as I like to say, and obviously impact their lives, right? Live the best version of their lives. And so everything that I really teach entrepreneurs comes back to knowing who you are and sharing that with your ideal customer through brand storytelling, through your marketing. And because I am an entrepreneur who does not want to live on social media, I'm a mom, I like to travel. That's a huge part of my client base as well. When it comes to marketing, I do not focus on social media. I focus on evergreen strategies, blogging, YouTube, podcasting, which, surprise, are great platforms for telling stories, Pinterest, SEO, things like that, so that you can really position your brand as the authority via search right away, which I feel like is a whole nother conversation we could have. But brand storing is really the center of everything that I teach. And so I work with my clients on a one-to-one basis, and inside of my program, Brandmerry Academy, which is a year-long immersive learning experience, which takes you from building your brand rooted in story all the way through to marketing and signing clients.
Fantastic. And so where do people go to get all of this Brandmerry magic?
Yeah, so brandmerry.com, BRANDMERRY. And you can also find me I am on Instagram for fun, but don't expect daily posting. It just doesn't happen.
You're busy living your life. That's awesome.
I am.
Fantastic. So where, I should have asked this at the beginning, but where in the world are you right now?
Yeah, so we're actually, we're from Missouri, which is where we lived before my husband and I were raised here. We were traveling in our RV for 2 years pre-pandemic. So we came back, we had a few health scares happen. So we are stationary, but traveling outward. We spent 3 months in Greece last year.
Oh,
We're
wow.
going back to Italy this year. So we've been traveling every 4 to 6 weeks. It's kind of nice. I don't know. After you live in an RV for 2 years, you're like, okay, I need like walls.
Right. A little bit more room. Yeah.
More.
Well, if you find yourself traveling to Australia, definitely look me up. We'll have to connect. So, Michelle, this has been fantastic. This is storytelling is one of my favorite topics. So I was so happy to have you here, that we could geek out and share your frameworks on how to tell better brand stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.